Hello everybody, it's Shady, and for today's video I wanted to do the completely pointless act of discussing the Wii U and why it failed. Um, so I have this kind of strange obsession with like thinking about failed systems and what they could have done to improve themselves. Don't ask me why. If you just indulge me, we'll go over everything. Like I said, this is a completely pointless thought experiment, but it's something I just think is something interesting, really. Because, I think, sometimes it just feels like when companies make these decisions, it's like, how is this possible? Like, when you feel like you yourself, I'm not saying that we probably completely know what would work, but it's like you feel like you know exactly what would have worked, but then a company does something insane. Like a good example, like Google Stadia. Like we all knew that was dead on arrival. It was completely stupid. No one wants a gaming streaming service. Yet Google put millions into this thing, probably even more, and it just bombed after like a few years. And it was like we knew that. Just like it was very similar to the Wii U, even though I really like the system, by the way. I think it's amazing. But yeah, it just obviously it failed. It fell flat. And obviously, first of all, let's actually talk about the system itself. So obviously, to discuss the Wii U, we first need to discuss the Wii. So obviously, Nintendo did like the most insane thing ever. So obviously, the Nintendo and Super Nintendo were insanely successful. The Game Boy and GBA were massive hits for them. But the N64 and GameCube were kind of not really failures, but they were nowhere near as popular. Everyone kind of jumped onto PlayStation at that point. N64 decided to go with, we'll stick with cartridges, so it lost a lot of third-party support. It still has somewhat of a cult following, and did okay. I think it still did like 20 odd million or something, or maybe even more than that. And then, the GameCube was kind of a failure for Nintendo. They tried desperately to get to sell. There was a point where I remember, at least in the UK, it cut down to I think it was $89.99 at one point, including a game. Like they wanted to get those things off the shelves, but it just wasn't selling. So they decided to do something very different. So obviously, they decided we're not going to make a HD system for the next generation. We're going to stick with the same power as the GameCube, essentially. It was obviously more performant, but we're going to innovate with motion controls. We're going to do something completely different. The way you play is now the improvement, and they kind of threw a spanner in the works. And now, generations aren't just about power now. It can also be within the control system itself, the way we interact with our games. So obviously, the Wii was paired with a little game called Wii Sports, which pretty much sold the system on its own. Like, I just want to explain to you guys how insane this is. The fact that they had a single game that just sold the system on its own. Like, there was so many people who bought a Wii just for basically a couple of games like Wii Sports and Wii Fit and one or two others, and that was it. That's all they needed. It appealed to the casual audience as well as a few core gamers. Not entirely the core gamers, more like the core Nintendo fans anyway, because they had their properties. And obviously, it was very successful. But then the software sales completely plummeted, and yeah, it just people chucked on a load of shovelware. It got this real bad reputation of just being a kiddie console, and not really for the hardcore gamers. The online wasn't exactly great, and it was kind of behind the times because it wasn't HD. Still a great system, but yeah, people just didn't like it as much. And then obviously they thought, we need to go into the HD generation ourselves. But we were so successful with that motion control stuff, we need to think of something else. So obviously, tablet gaming, mobile gaming was big. The DS was massive at the time, let's not forget as well, with its dual screen functionality. That's like the second biggest system of all time. It's Nintendo's most successful console, like 150 million units or something like that. So they decided, you know what? We're going to go for the dual screen. So they had the gamepad. So this is basically a controller with a screen on it, and it had dual screen functionality. So the whole point was we can appeal to the DS casual crowd again, but still, because we have a full set of buttons, the core gamers. So the concept makes sense in a way, but the problem is, obviously, as you can already tell, yeah, no one wants a dual screen, and the naming Wii U was a big issue. This was kind of the thing. It was like, you know, the marketing was very confusing. People thought, is this just an add-on to the Wii? You know, do we just need to buy the controller? Is that it? Like, people didn't get it, the casual crowd anyway, and obviously the core gamers, they knew that Sony and Microsoft's new systems were just like around the corner, so why even bother with this? And then yeah, it just, unfortunately, it failed. And it was like, if we obviously don't include the Virtual Boy, it was Nintendo's worst selling console of all time. Virtual Boy is obviously the worst. I think it was like 13 million units. It's one of the worst selling ever. It did worse than the Dreamcast. And yeah, it felt like it was kind of, it could have been curtains for Nintendo at this point. But they managed to turn it around, and obviously they released the Switch. But like I said, let's discuss the Wii U now itself. What I think would have made it a success, and I think what would have allowed it to, you know, actually be successful. Obviously, we're pretending the Switch never happened and everything. But yeah, first of all, obviously, the obvious thing, the name. Let's say Wii U was bloody stupid. You know, it just doesn't differentiate it from what that was. And it just, you know, it confused a lot of people, and that should have been the obvious thing. If I'm going to be very honest, I think the Wii name itself isn't necessarily a problem, but I think it was the U aspect. Really, it's the thing is, nowadays I feel like, obviously Sony and Microsoft released these Pro systems, didn't they? The PS4 Pro and the Xbox Series X. And in my opinion, the Wii U really should have been marketed as a Pro system. You know, it should have just been called Wii HD or something, in my opinion. And then people would understand, oh, okay, this is an upgraded version of the previous system. I mean, it could already play all Wii games. It was capable of using Wiimote and Nunchuck already, and it would have been fine, I think. And obviously, on top of that, even though this is, in looking back, it's the defining factor of the console, the gamepad. Shouldn't have had the gamepad, let's be honest. This should have just had the Pro controller. I don't know if you saw the Wii Pro controller, it's really cool. Amazing battery life, just a standard controller, has the two buttons on the top, analog sticks on the top as opposed to the bottom, so kind of like the opposite of the PlayStation controller. And it kind of was basically a 360 controller. That should have been your standard controller. Unless we can get into the nitty-gritty as well. The console, it just felt like it was released maybe a year or so too late. Like I said, PS3, it was 2012 that came out, November, exactly a year later. PS4 and the Xbox One were out. So yeah, it just felt like it was a bit too late. In my opinion, it maybe should have come out a couple of years sooner. And it should have been Nintendo, like I said, it should have been a Pro system, where Nintendo should have said, this is basically just for those hardcore Wii owners, for the hardcore crowd who, you know, have a Wii or want to play Nintendo games, this is your system. You know, if they would have done that, probably would have got more third-party support as well. Could have got a foothold in the market before the other two systems came out and had a decent run. And obviously, getting onto the hardware itself, obviously, like I said, it should have had a standard controller. And, you know, for some reason, it didn't have, like, a hard drive. And it didn't have an Ethernet port. Like, how could you not have that? It had an 8 gig and a 32 gig model. And at this point, obviously, Nintendo, they had the eShop with the Wii, and then also with the Wii U. And it had so many amazing games. And then you limit the amount of space you can have. They didn't even have an expandable hard drive of their own. There wasn't even, like, you know, an internal or external hard drive that you could get. But there wasn't a place to attach it on the console. It's really stupid. You know, they could have just had, in my opinion, it should have been 8 gigabytes onboard memory, and then you have an internal hard drive similar to like what Microsoft did. That would have been a good plan, I think, with the option to use an external hard drive. You know, you could have just, like, at this point, you know, Sony and Microsoft both had, I think, a 500 gigabyte model, or were going to release them anyway. Yeah, and like I think, you know, you could get like 300 odd gigabytes. It was just like, you know, a lot of memory there, because this was the time when buying digital games started becoming a thing. DLC, all of these things were standard. So not having a hard drive was idiotic. You know, that's the basic for the hardcore gamer, I think. Especially, and an Ethernet port. Like, people playing online at this point. So, you want a stable connection. Like hardcore online gamers, they use Ethernet ports. So why would you expect them to buy one separately? I know that's not the Nintendo way of doing things, but still, I think it would have gone a long way. And obviously, we've got to say, the games as well. I think Nintendo's first party stuff was great, but the problem is they had no third party support. So, there was these big stretches with no games. So, if they would have released a couple of years earlier, could have had more third party support, that would have been fine then, and they could have, had that gap gone. Or there would have been less gaps between game releases, because I mean, like at times it was like months between releases on the Wii U. It is insane. It was like worse than the N64 at times. You were just basically waiting for Nintendo first parties at one point. Like there was the odd third party game here and there, like Ubisoft were champs on that system. But yeah, really besides them and like a couple others, no one was doing anything in terms of third party stuff. And yeah, if like I said, if it would have been released earlier, would have been the Pro system, had that standard controller, hardcore gamers would have liked it, would have got more of a foothold. You could have got more third party support. But yeah, that's most of what I can think of really. Obviously, it didn't end up failing. Nintendo didn't end up failing because of it, because they have just so much money in reserve, and their IPs are so strong. They can always come back. Obviously, we can't forget the 3DS turned things around as well, didn't it? This is one of the key things, and what was really interesting, because the Wii U, the failings of the Wii U, but the success of the 3DS kind of helped Nintendo to realize that their strength is clearly handled. So obviously that's what led to the Switch being the hybrid system it was, and why I think Nintendo won't be abandoning that model anymore. They're pretty much set in stone now. Even though I've been kind of talking, not really smack, because I do like the Wii U. I don't know about you guys, but I kind of miss the days where Nintendo would be super weird and experimental like that. Like, as much as the system did fail, it's super interesting, isn't it? Like, who would think to just put a gamepad or a screen on your controller besides Nintendo? Who would decide to do motion controls instead of standard HD gaming at the time? Like, it's what makes Nintendo so great, in my opinion. It's always been their strength and their weakness in a way, isn't it? Kind of stuck in the way, doing their own thing. It's led to kind of, like I said, that sort of hit and miss kind of thing with Nintendo in a way. Like with the 3DS, where they added 3D, kind of pointless, cool gimmick, and helped separate the DS and 3DS in a way, instead of just calling it a Super 3DS, I guess. But yeah, still, that's all I can really think of anyway. But yeah, like I said, I actually really like the Wii U. I think it's a great system. And it is a good one to collect for, actually. It's still, like, it's decently cheap. That's like the crazy thing about the system. It's one that, you can, I think you can pick up the system for under a couple £100. Most games are really cheap. The lineup is the library is under 200 games as well. So it's a great system if you just want to collect a full library of games. And yeah, you should get one, I think. That's like the main takeaway from this, I'd say. Like, I'd say jump on the Wii U now. Obviously, most of the games on the system have been ported now, and are available on the Switch, but there's a couple that aren't yet. There was a few interesting third-party ports on there that used the gamepad. Mass Effect 3 for one. And you got like the Arkham games, the Assassin's Creed games. There's a really cool thing where you can just look at the map and do menuing on the fly, looking at the gamepad. Like having a persistent map viewable at all times just by looking down, I think is really cool, because a lot of games the mini-map isn't enough, and I always feel like, especially in like these Assassin's Creed type games, I feel like I have to open the map a lot, and it's just cool not having to do that. That was one of the best features, definitely. It's one of the best features of the DS, 3DS, and the Wii U, really. And let's not forget, this thing could play Wii games as well. The eShop is closed down now, and the online is closing down next year. But yeah, you can still play Wii U games on there, which is awesome. Or Wii games, obviously you can play Wii U games. Yeah, but it's great. And, there is another game, the key one that hasn't been ported yet. Well, there's 3 big ones that haven't been ported yet, and I would say are still worth buying this system for alone. And that would be obviously Wind Waker and Twilight Princess HD. We've got the two best versions of these games available on the Wii U. HD, best quality life features, that gamepad support, and obviously you could just use the Pro Controller if you prefer. And then Xenoblade Chronicles X, which I have no idea if that's ever being ported. It's kind of crazy. Like, is it just going to be stuck on the Wii U or what? Yeah, it's really amazing because it's very strange because it's less story heavy than the other ones, much more gameplay focused. Pretty much just feels like like the other Xenoblade games, the Chronicles ones, where it's just like a single player MMO really. But in this one, it's very much you got a lot to do and explore early on. It's a really cool game, and it uses the gamepad really well. You just have the map on there at all times. You need to use the gamepad though. Even though I still think this is a cool feature, but when you're actually using the Pro Controller, you can use the gamepad still, or it's still there and you can have it on the stand next to TV. It's really cool, because yeah, the game is really designed for it. And let's not forget, even though it's on both, you can even pick up Breath of the Wild on this thing as well. It was like the swan song of the system. I think it was like it was Nintendo's final release on it. I think there was still a couple limited run releases. I think Axiom Verge or another limited run game was the final release on there. But yeah, it's still amazing. Breath of the Wild is an absolute masterpiece, and one you should pick up on there anyway. So, but yeah, that's pretty much all I have to say about this. And yeah, the Wii U is awesome. Have a great one.